John held several senior editorial positions at Business Week. Today, John will discuss new approaches to encouraging and stimulating urban innovation by focusing on infrastructure development and financing. He will also examine new research from new cities that relates to urban mobility and public transport. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. John Rossant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rivera, and thank you, Assistant Commissioner Epstein. My thanks to the Council for inviting me this morning. Yes, I'm the chairman of the NewCities Foundation. We're a global nonprofit. I'm a New Yorker, born in this city, but unfortunately the head office of NewCities is up in Montreal, just up the river there. And I wish it were here, but it's not. We're a young organization, and we look at the future of cities, and we want to make cities better places in which to live and work. We work all around the world on various research initiatives, and our scope of work goes from governance to infrastructure to mobility to lighting to ways to promote innovation in cities, but starting about 4 or 5 years ago, we began to focus more and more on the mobility and transportation piece. And we felt that as an institution, we had to really wake up and get ahead of all the changes and the disruptive changes that are happening in this sector, because if you think about it, of course, if you look at mobility and urban transportation, it's been a very static sector for probably a century, more than a century. Cars, subways, buses, trams, nothing much has changed except we're dealing with bigger and bigger population, increasing strains on infrastructure, etc. Suddenly everything is changing with the arrival of connectivity, connected vehicles, geolocalization, ride-hailing services like Uber and Lyft and others, and this is a global phenomenon, of course. And the electrification of fleets of vehicles, and then tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, the arrival of autonomous vehicles. So we think that this is kind of like a Copernican revolution in everything that you're doing, that we're doing. And so we wanted to get ahead of this, and we began about 4 years ago. We started a kind of internal study about the future of urban mobility, and we gathered together about 100 or 150 experts from around the world to debate it. That became a kind of annual thing that we've held in London and Tokyo. And one of the other initiatives that we took about 2 years ago was a connected mobility study task force, where we wanted to look at the impact of the Ubers and the Lyfts and other kinds of connected mobility services, the impact on public transportation and public transportation authorities. And we nominated a young man called Greg Lindsay, who's a noted expert in this field, to become our Connected Mobility Fellow. He has written a very, very interesting report, which, if I can figure this out, hold on. Here it is. It's called, there's the link. It's connected, it's called Now Arriving, a Connected Mobility Roadmap for Public Transportation. And Greg takes Washington, D.C., London, Manila, and Sao Paulo as example, very, very different examples of ways in which this connected mobility world that's coming into being is impacting public transportation. And I think there's a real challenge here certainly for the New York area. And that is, as a New Yorker, I have to say I'm deeply concerned by the state of the transportation infrastructure and transportation services in this area. I mean, last week I landed in LaGuardia. I can't remember where. I think I was coming back from Canada. And it took 2 hours to go from LaGuardia to downtown New York in traffic. And it's appalling. It's just unacceptable in this city that is the largest city in the country, a country that's the strongest economic power in the world. And I don't get the sense that things are improving too much. I think one of the findings of our study, and I urge you to download it, to read it, it's freely available, is that public transport authorities have to become more than simply operating a service. You have to interact in very creative ways with this new universe that's coming into being. And I had a look at the 2045 study. It's very finely prepared. There's a lot of good things in there, but I have to wonder about the time frame on that, I must say. And if 2045 is just a long way out, and some of these issues are now, and you have to be dealing with these in a much more proactive way, in my view, and I think in our view. Autonomous vehicles are going to arrive with a speed that I think would surprise many of us. And I think it's important for the New York area, the New York authorities, to get ahead of this. This will impact you in so many fundamental ways. And I would love to see New York, as the greatest city in this nation, become the cutting edge of how to interact with autonomous operators. I don't think there is any policy, there are any plans yet that you should need to be thinking about this now. But I really don't want to be in the position of lecturing you. You know your work much better than I do. But it's happening, it's arriving, it will impact this city. And I think the autonomous technologies are largely here. We could deploy them tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, including autonomous trucks and things like that for goods delivery and logistics. So much of the debate around autonomy has to do with the regulatory piece. And I think it's important for all of you to decide what kind of mobility world do you want in the future here in New York. And it's important for you to lead the discussion and not be led by it. I don't think it's probably good for this area to be blindsided by new operators like Uber or Lyft, or let's say tomorrow subscription services for autonomous vehicles, which I think is going to be one of the big models going forward. Let's set the standards for the world that we want. And that's, by the way, the message that we're hearing from outfits like Google, which of course is investing heavily into autonomous vehicles. They say, we have the technology, we're waiting, we want to understand what the regulation is. And up until now, New York State, I don't think, has particularly progressive regulation when it comes to autonomy and new kinds of vehicles. So let me just see if I can click on this link. Oh, no. Okay, I'm not going to press help there. I'll just press OK. Yeah. Yeah, that's it, yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So here's the study, and as I said, how do I, is it,
yeah.
Just to click this one?
Yeah, you can just.
Oh, okay. So it's 100 odd pages, and I think some of the findings, there are some recommendations, as Washington, London, Sao Paulo, and Manila, and there are recommendations about possible ways to proceed. And part of it is engaging with the connected mobility universe. You have to do that. And I would say that we look at cities like Los Angeles, which certainly has huge challenges because the transportation infrastructure there is really only now getting off the ground, the public transportation infrastructure. LA, Seattle, both these cities in the past couple of years have launched very important policy task forces looking at how the cities and the transport authorities can stay ahead of these vast shifts and disruptions that are taking place on the tech side. And I think I would urge, New York and the council to do the same thing. And we're here to help in any capacity. It's really so important because New York cannot afford to be a follower, in my view. One of the other things that we look at closely at the foundation is financing infrastructure, needed infrastructure. And as you yourself said, there's no secret. We desperately need new and upgraded infrastructure in all cities in this country, particularly in New York. Who's going to pay for that? And we have a task force looking at new public-private models that are coming down the line that can help pay for some of these very, very badly needed kinds of infrastructure projects. And that is, well, there's, well, take my word for it. There's a good, and it's also available online on our site. There's a very, very good study. But I think one of the things that I think would be important for New York is to look also, again, at what other cities, not only in the United States, but around the world are doing. And part of the mission of the NewCities Foundation, we believe very deeply that cities can learn from and must learn from one another. And one of the very interesting sides of the work I do is to look in some detail about how cities like Singapore or Hong Kong or Tokyo or Osaka or Delhi approach their mass transit and transportation issues. And I think there are learnings there for this area, for Americans in general and for New York in particular. And there are things that, that lessons that we can impart to others, of course. So that's an important part of the mission. And one of the things that we're actually doing now is we believe that there's a really big new industry that's coming into being, which one could loosely define as new mobility, which is connected mobility, car sharing, autonomy, etc., batteries. We felt at the foundation there's no sort of single gathering anywhere in the world that brings this new universe together. And so it caught our eye a few years ago what Los Angeles and how Los Angeles and the city council there and the Department of Transportation of the city of Los Angeles, how they were moving. They had, as some of you may know, commissioned something called the Los Angeles 2035 plan, which is 10 years earlier than 2045, looking at how the LA area would really be impacted by some of these new technologies. It's a really, really smart document. And of course, voters in California in November, the same election which saw the election of Donald Trump, California voters approved by a huge margin, 66, 67%, Measure M. And Measure M raises the sales tax in California so that, and it will fund public transportation infrastructure. Particularly in Los Angeles County, and it raises $120 billion over the next 10 years. So we felt that for a variety of reasons, LA in some ways will emerge as a kind of global epicenter for smart thinking about the future of urban mobility. And that's why next November, we are organizing, with the help of the city, with Mayor Garcetti and the DOT, something called LA Commotion, which is a kind of 5-day conference for practitioners, but also for the general public about the future of mobility in cities. And we hope, I'm sure there'll be a lot of people from New York there. There will be a lot of people from around the world. There's a great deal of interest in what's happening in Los Angeles, and sort of by extension in New York and other cities. Sometime it would be nice to organize a similar event here in New York and gather thinkers from around the world. I want to look at, it's going to be a little bit hard, but I urge you, there are some, let me just get some of the findings up. I'm sorry. Yep. Well, I urge you all to read it. It's a very smart document, and please do download it. I mean, on both sides of this room. Again, we think that, look, infrastructure obviously is a huge part of the problem, and how to improve it, how to maintain it, it's essential, obviously, for this city. But as important is how you interact with the new entrants in the market, the ride-hailing services, autonomous vehicles, etc., which are very, very, this is tomorrow. And you absolutely need to be thinking about that today. And obviously, Madam, you are beginning, I think your approach looking at millennials and Gen Z is probably the right one, and their needs and aspirations. So I'm happy to take some questions. I don't want to drone on too much longer.
So thank you so much for your time and
Sure.
your comments. And I would like to open it up for comments by the members. But I want to start off with one question for you. So I've been doing this a long time, actually. I had a full head of hair when I started this. And I had a daughter, but that's not the story. The thing that I've always struggled with, and maybe being up north, you can see what the difference is there. But transportation, when you ask people what's important to them, transportation is always at the top of their list. But in terms of the agenda for the nation, in the list of the top 10 priorities, it's number 26. So what can we do to elevate the profile of transportation in this country and in this region, so that it does become something that people want to pay a little more attention to and make more investment in?
Well, if I knew the answer to that, I would probably not be here. But I think a lot has to be done. You're right. I think it is of primordial importance. But somehow, I would love to see, federal authorities really come say up front, this is one of the top issues affecting the nation. So it affects the nation as a whole, I think. I mean, New York is a gateway city. And you look at the state of our airports, the state of connectivity between airports and the center of the city, the fact that we are, New York itself has become a great startup city. I mean, it's probably the second in the nation after Silicon Valley. I mean, who would have thunk that? But I think that very success, I believe, is imperiled by factors such as the state of mobility and transportation. It increases costs. If it becomes really painful for people to get to work, that's a serious issue, and that's going to eat into New York competitivity. I think people have to realize that. How we make them realize that, I don't know. I wish I knew the answer.
Well, we certainly look forward to working with you and your organization to make this more a discussion about economic security, so that people realize the importance of the infrastructure. Any of the members like to ask any questions?
If I could?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Ron. If it's already contained in your report, I apologize, and I will take the time to review,
yes,
and
please.
I will have my Commissioner of Planning as well, she really sits on the pulse of what's happening. If you were to, and I know every city has its own dynamics, and we talk about mobility for work-related issues, but what about for leisure, for travel and leisure? If you were to prioritize where we should be looking for travel and leisure, specifically I ask because my county is a county that we're sort of focusing more on making our county a destination, but we need the infrastructure and mobility, that piece, to be spot on if we're going to get there. Where would you prioritize? Where do you think we should be focusing?
Well, I mean, I think work is probably the most important. But I mean, people have to get in and out of your county for it to be successful.
Right.
So I don't know about the leisure part. I think we're probably less focused on that. I mean, I think a lot of people are looking at that and how it will be affected in the future.
From a tourism perspective, your report is really not addressing that as much as an economic development piece.
Yes, it's
so
more about
economic
development.
Mobility
yeah.
For working for economic.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's it's how one circulates in a city, whether that's for work or for other things.
So it's strictly urban
yes.
focused.
Yes.
Okay, which is interesting because my county has really developed itself over from the inception because of New York City.
Yeah.
Because it's a suburban county where everyone literally was getting up and leaving probably still in the 80 percentile, gets up and leaves and comes into New York City and travels back. So that's why mobility is so important for us in Putnam County, particularly infrastructure, and then homeland and security and safety as well. But we are also looking at it as a tourism, economic driver destination piece.
Well, I mean, the other thing is you have airports in Putnam County, and the whole, you don't.
No.
Small airports. Okay. So correct that.
Yeah, there's no 747.
Correct the record there.
Putnam County anyway.
But airport city connectivity is a hugely important thing, and I think we suffer from that here in New York.
Well, I mean, everyone in Putnam County, myself included, flying to Chicago last week, had the experience of LaGuardia, which I just said to Ron it's a third world airport. In some sense, and Ron said it's going to get better, and I know it will.
Well, it will.
And I know it will because there's a lot of very intelligent, passionate people about making sure that this city maintains its integrity as being the number one capital.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, there's a race out there, and cities are competing with each other, and that's getting more intense. I was out in Los Angeles 2 weeks ago, and I went to see the CEO of LAX, the international airport there. Big airport, probably as big, if not bigger than JFK. And they're very, very, very focused right now on the future of urban mobility because they need to understand how tomorrow people will get to the airport. And so they had to make a decision now. There's an expansion program in the airport about whether to build a new parking structure, which would cost, $60 or $70 million. And because in 10 years, 8 years, it might be not needed because with autonomous vehicles we may need less parking structures. So what do? So in the end, they just decided to go ahead and build it, but in such a way as it can be easily converted to an autonomous vehicle holding structure. So that's interesting. But then he said, and we're building it with a reinforced roof. And I said, well, why a reinforced roof? And he said, well, in a few years, we expect that some people will be coming to the airport in personal vertical takeoff and landing craft. Well, you laugh, but that is being planned for today, ladies and gentlemen.
I guess.
And so the future is happening more quickly than I think we expect or we.
Well, I certainly remember the Jetsons, so I'm still waiting for my laundry to go through a chute and come out cleaned and folded on the other side. Thank you, Mr. Ross.
Get me off this crazy thing, right? Anybody else have any other questions?
Yeah. So can you describe a little bit some of the lessons you're learning from the other world cities about at least keeping pace with technology, if not anticipating it? What are they doing? And it's so rapid, and it almost overtook us in the last 5 years. That we've had discussions. There's been discussions about autonomous vehicles, or there's been discussions about different ways to move people, and they've sort of been parked on the side in the popular mechanics magazines and so forth, say 10, 15 years ago. But now they're rapidly gaining financial support, and they're becoming more real. So my question is, what are you learning from the report you did and from your work with other world cities? What are you learning about what they're doing to keep up, to anticipate, to properly plan for, and how could we learn from that?
Yeah. That's a good question. Well, I urge you to read the report, but I think that Look, I think London in particular, which is one of the cities that we studied, they Transport for London, which is, I guess, the MTA of London, are doing, very interesting, innovative links with certain private sector operators. They're looking at new ways to finance new projects like the Crossrail projects across London. So I think it's quite innovative. You should be looking at that. You should be looking at the way other cities solve and deal with their transportation issues. Rather than kind of always being in a reactive phase. It would be so terrible, I think, for the New York area to get into this kind of downward spiral of declining ridership on the public transport facilities, huge maintenance issues, Uber and Lyft's clogging up the streets, and that's been a real contributor, by the way, to congestion here in New York, is the fact that people aren't using your subways, but are calling up an Uber. I do, myself, sometimes. I'm a big user of the subways, I hasten to add. But the ride-sharing operators are clogging up the streets. Do we want more of that? And, what happens? Buses can barely move, so these are really real issues here. And look, as you said, I think every city has a sort of different profile, different needs, etc. But now is the time to innovate and experiment. And I would love to see New York City, New York area become a leader in that. I mean, you cannot afford to be a follower. We have to lead the country in this, and I don't see that happening. So maybe I would say, call to action a little bit.
I have a question with the Fed, sort of a similar question to Mr. Wheeler's. What have you learned from some of the global cities that you have visited in terms of financing some of these major infrastructure projects that may fit within the New York environment that will allow the New York area to support, from a financial perspective, development of some of their systems? Yeah. I mean, you talk about the measure in LA. Don't know if that'll pass here in New York, but are there any other 3P type models that you've come across that may work well in this environment, or something else, from your opinion?
Well, I mean, thank you. That's a really, really good question. I think some of the models that from Asian cities are really, really good ones. I mean, if you look at Tokyo or Hong Kong in particular, the public transportation lines are privately owned. I mean, they're private companies. Tokyo, I think there are 5 different metro companies, and it's an enormous system, and probably the largest in the world. It's the most populous city in the world. Runs like clockwork. It's incredibly clean. It's economical. The delays are measured in seconds rather than minutes when there are delays. It is very, very impressive. And by the way, all the companies are profitable. So what are they doing right? Well, one of the things that I think they're doing right, but again, it's a Japanese and an Asian context, is that the operators are allowed to commercially develop stations. And that gives them a profitability that can then help finance the public mission of moving people, moving citizens around. So, is that a model we can experiment with here in the United States or here in New York? I don't know. But it certainly works really, really well. And anybody who's been to, any big Asian city, sort of North Asia, it's really, really quite impressive. And there's also, by the way, there's it's not only that, but I think one thing the Asians and also the Europeans do very well are policies that promote biking. New York is a great biking city, except when it snows in the winter, perhaps, or it's really, really hot in the summer. but it's, you know, it's comparatively flat, etc. You know, there are bicycle lanes, but it's pretty treacherous out there. So I think we have to experiment with new kinds of, you know, biking will increase. Absolutely, there's no question about it. And people like it. It's a way to be healthy. It's a great way to get around. I use city bikes all the time. But, you know, it's dangerous. And I was just a few weeks ago actually in Japan. And in Japanese cities, in the Japanese city I was at, called Fukuoka, in the southern Japan, they have very, very, very broad bicycle lanes on the main thoroughfares that serve for pedestrians and for bikes, and they somehow, you know, they don't run into each other, and it really, really works well, and it creates just a much more pleasant kind of city. I'd love to see that happen here. But biking is something, you know, again, I think New York has to grapple with. City bikes are great, but, you know, the bike sharing 2.0 doesn't involve fixed stations, as many of you know. You know, we now have stationless bike sharing services where you just pick up, you have an app and you can pick up a bike anywhere, anywhere, and drop it off anywhere. And I think that's probably going to be the future rather than the fixed type of city bike stations.
Any other questions? Yes.
Just talking about the autonomous vehicles, you know, what are the infrastructure challenges? In other words, what do, you know, cities, counties have to do to make these things work well on the roads? If anything, I don't know if there's like overhead booms that the LiDAR needs to use to read or anything like that. And then, you know, assuming there are such infrastructure needs, are there any models to pay for it? You know, utilizing the P3. You know, if Alphabet is going to have their Waymo, how do we get them to foot some of the bill so that their product, you know, works well on our streets?
Look, I mean, I think right now, I think Waymo, which is Google's autonomous vehicle subsidiary, you know, Waymo needs you guys much more than you need them. In the future, that may not be the case. So I think now's the time to get them in the room and other, you know, future operators of autonomous vehicles, including all the car manufacturers, because car manufacturers, the big three in this country and others, the Volkswagen and Toyota, are all looking at transforming themselves into mobility services companies rather than just makers of cars. They have to be part of the conversation, I think. So I don't know which way it's going to go. But I think now is the time to set intelligent regulations so that, again, you plan for the world that you want. You don't want to let them do it for you. And it's time, the public good, we need to come up with smart regulations for a more efficient, you know, mobility universe for tomorrow, for sure. How that happens, I'm not quite sure.
Is your organization looking at urban goods movement issues, and are you seeing things that you think might have some applicability in New York City?
Yeah, I mean, we look, you know, the logistics side is super important, and I think it's somewhat overlooked because everybody looks at, oh, the Jetsons or, you know, my autonomous car, et cetera, but probably the real big economic impact will be exactly in autonomous trucking, et cetera, in all sorts of ways. Yes, we look at it, and I think it's going to be, you know, it has a huge potential impact in this city. Certainly, if you look at, I mean, you know, the way streets in downtown Manhattan anyway are clogged with, you know, FedEx and UPS buses delivering packages, etc. We have to, you know, New York is a great city of commerce in which goods move about, and that has to be done in a much more efficient manner. I mean, part of the issue Midtown is trucks everywhere clogging up the streets. So I don't, obviously I don't have an answer, but it has to be a big part of, you know, what we're looking